All right, so within the digestive system, we have the alimentary canal, and then we also have the accessory organs. Now, basically, the accessory organs are any part of the digestive system through which food does not directly touch or pass. But they are important and involved within the digestive system. So the first accessory organ we have are the salivary glands. And there are actually three different salivary glands. There is the sublingual, which if you think of where the lingual tonsil is, it's kind of towards the back. The submandibular, which the mandible is your jaw, so it's actually within your jaw itself. And the parotoid gland. Now, the combination of these three glands produce the two different types of saliva that both wet and lubricate the food. So we have the watery type that wets down the food and the mucousy type that actually forms the bolus. Now, in addition to producing the saliva, the salivary glands also produce the enzyme salivary amylase that is responsible for the beginning of the digestion process for carbohydrates. Now, the salivary glands are susceptible to a disease called the mumps. The mumps is actually caused by a virus, and it targets the salivary glands. Specifically, it tends to go after most the parotoid gland. Which is kind of back at the back of the throat. But what that does is it gives kind of people a swollen appearance because their salivary glands actually get infected and swell. Now, if this occurs and you don't get treatment, it can infect the testes, especially if the mumps is contracted post-puberty. And if it is contracted post-puberty, it can cause sterility. The other organ that the mumps can affect is the pancreas. So it's not just going to make you look a little bit funny, it can actually very much affect some of your organs and their functionings. The next accessory organ is probably one of the most important organs in the entire digestive system. So despite the fact that it doesn't actually touch food, it does not mean that it's not important. This is the liver. This is a very large organ that is capable of regeneration, and it is the second largest organ in the body behind the skin. Now, this actually has a series of 10 different functions. So, and you'll see a lot of these functions are critically important for the functioning of us as humans. The first one is the production of bile, and that's its main digestive function. So you'll probably want to make sure that you note that. That is its digestive function. The bile that the liver produces helps to emulsify, or in other words, break into small droplets, the fat as it passes into the small intestine. It also will take amino acids from the small intestine and make proteins. It also is a storage location for minerals like copper and iron iron especially is needed for the hemoglobin in your red blood cells. It also plays a role in maintaining your blood glucose levels. It can break down glycogen to glucose to put it into the bloodstream, or it can actually pull glucose out of the bloodstream and convert it into glycogen for storage within the liver organ itself. It is one of the filtering locations for the body that we talked about earlier. We mentioned very briefly with the lymphatic system, with the spleen. So it does filter blood, and what it does is it changes harmful chemicals into less harmful ones that can be eliminated by the kidneys. So it actually helps to detoxify our blood. It synthesizes fat for carbohydrates or proteins so that we can store them and use them for energy. Like the spleen, it stores red blood cells, and again, this is another reserve that we have in case of injury. It's going to store fat-soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K. It also excretes what we call bilirubin. Bilirubin is kind of a yellowish substance. This is the broken down parts of red blood cells that is secreted with the bile so that it actually enters the digestive system. The bilirubin has no digestive function at all, but what we do is we actually have the bilirubin get broken down within the small intestine. So it's not a digestive function, but we take the parts of the red blood cells and finalize their breakdown within the small intestine through the excretion of that bilirubin. And the last one is it helps to activate our vitamin D. Now, associated with the liver, and when we look at the pig, we'll actually see this, it's kind of on the underside of the liver, is a small sac called the gall bladder. So like I said, this is a small sac that is inferior to the liver. Sometimes it actually takes on kind of a greenish appearance because it concentrates and stores the bile, which is kind of that color that the liver makes. Now, there's a duct that leads from the gallbladder into the small intestine. Now, sometimes the gallbladder actually concentrates the bile too much and we end up with what's called gallstones. In other words, the bile goes from being a liquid form to actually a crystal form. And those crystals damage the tissue and cause pain. We can actually, if this becomes too much of a problem or the gallbladder becomes too damaged, you can actually remove your gallbladder. But what that prevents in someone who has had their gallbladder removed is if they eat a meal that has a lot of fat, we don't have that stored up supply of bile to emulsify that fat, to break it into the small droplets. So oftentimes people who have had their gallbladder removed have to be very, very careful in terms of their fat intake at a particular meal or any particular time. Because they can't emulsify it, the body is not as able to digest it and break it down. And so oftentimes their feces do tend to be a little looser because they actually kind of have those slicks of fat still remaining in their feces. The last accessory structure we want to look at is also very important, and that is the pancreas. It lies just underneath the stomach, and it has two different functions. Remember, I said it's kind of a schizophrenic organ. Its digestive function is to produce the pancreatic juice, which can break down our carbohydrates, our proteins, and our lipids. It also contains that sodium bicarbonate, that base that we need to neutralize the stomach acid as it comes from the stomach and into the small intestine so that it doesn't damage the lining of the small intestine. Its second function is its endocrine function, and that we discussed with the endocrine system. It produces hormones like glucagon, insulin, and also one that we didn't discuss, but they're called pancreatic polypeptides. So depending on the cells that are actually involved with the pancreas, you can be talking about its endocrine function or its digestive function. Now, the last bit that we need to look at is actually our diagram here. And what we want to do is we want to go through and actually label this. Let me get my projection fixed up here. Okay. That. There we go. All right, we're going to start over here on the right-hand side. Okay. And the large gland that is actually with the top one, that is one of your salivary glands, and that's the parotoid gland. Underneath that, it is actually pointing to the thing that kind of hangs down off of the soft palate. That's the thing that you see hanging from the back of your throat when you open up and say, ah, that is your uvula. The structure on the line below it is pointing to your tongue. And then that upper portion there, basically up in here, is your pharynx. As the pharynx descends down, it becomes a tube, which is your esophagus. The line underneath the esophagus is pointing to the spleen. You can see how it's kind of on the end. It's on the left end of your stomach, which is the one beneath it, and that is on the left-hand side of your body. It almost looks like a little bit of a pillow kind of over to the side of the stomach. Now, I'm actually going to have you add a line in here, in between the stomach and the next line. That is looking at the part of the tube there that goes across. That is your transverse colon. The next one is pointing to a different part of your colon, your descending colon. And then you can see from the descending colon, we're actually going to skip a line. It kind of comes down and makes an S, and that is your sigmoid colon. Now, the line in between is actually pointing to kind of the middle part there of your small intestine. Okay, so it's not the duodenum, because that is the first part of your small intestine. What that actually is that's the larger middle portion of your small intestine, which is the jejunum. Underneath the sigmoid colon empties into your rectum, and the rectum empties out at the anus. So now we're going to go across here to the other side at the top on the left-hand side of the diagram. Okay, the top one is basically pointing to the oral cavity. And then the next two are two other types of salivary glands. The first one is your sublingual gland, right underneath your tongue. And then buried down further in your bone is the submandibular gland. Okay, the large organ that's pointed to under your diaphragm is your liver. The next one is actually pointing to this little bit of the curve coming off of the stomach, and that is your duodenum. The next one's a little bit tough to see. It's actually pointing to this organ here that kind of lies behind the stomach, and that is your pancreas. The next one underneath the pancreas is that other part of the colon, that is your ascending colon. And I can tell that's the ascending colon because if you look off the end here with the bottom line, it has your appendix attached there. The last one is the portion of the small intestine which actually empties into the ascending colon, and that is the ileum. And so that completes our look at the digestive system in terms of our notes.